Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Carl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion or simply want to ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to invite you to join our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that would resonate with and challenge us and our fellow seekers here in the desert.
We believe that a key to the journey is to keep asking good questions, and we believe that all stories are sacred.
Our hope is that you will find life and healing for your body and mind, and that you will be able to be who you are and be who you are.
And now, here is our show.
Good morning and welcome back to the Desert Sanctuary. We're glad you're here. I apologize that Laura is busy doing her craft. She's at school and she's actually at a class today. And she's usually not available during the middle of the day until in just about a month. I'll have her all summer. So we need to record a lot. I'm here today with Rebecca, Lewis-Pankratz. Rebecca has kind of become a friend of mine. I respect a lot of the stuff that she's doing with poverty simulations, with working with schools, trauma-informed, resilience, all that kind of stuff. Don't want to go too much into the bio and miss the talk today. So we want to talk, first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Carl, it's a pleasure to be back.
Yeah, becoming a regular thing here. We love people that have that natural wisdom. We like mystics, we like those people that are basing their doctrine on their experience and on their love for people, things like that. So we're glad to have you here.
Thanks, Carl.
So let's talk about something that you actually practiced on me when I asked to have lunch with you, because of your poverty simulation that kind of always kind of triggers me and helps me learn and things like that and experience great things. But then I didn't know why I wanted to talk to you, and you did this mad, sad, glad, and afraid. Are those the right words?
Yep.
With me. So let's talk about that and why it's important, why it works.
Carl, thanks.
You bet.
I work with families all across Kansas, and then also, with schools, and then with my own kiddos, kind of had this personal history of having, dysregulated kids inside of elementary school, and just walking that out first as a parent and having these really committed school people that were grasping at straws a lot of times for how to help my kids. And then, graduated college and went into nonprofit work and saw lots of other moms that I was working with in the Poverty Project who were coming in the same spot I was. So, chronic dysregulation in kids and lots of challenges with the business of school. And then I went to work for the organization I work with now, and primarily work with schools on chronically dysregulated kids. And so lots
For
around
someone who might not know, what is dysregulation? Can you break that down in case?
Yeah. And so when you think about our nervous system, right, the simplest way to think about it is we're regulated and we're in our cortex, or in the upstairs part of our brain, or when something happens, or we're living in an environment with lots of toxic stress, right, which means there's just ongoing powerlessness, overwhelm, isolation, with limited resources. So it can just activate our nervous system to be on high alert. And dysregulation is when we kind of flip our lid from the cortex, the upstairs brain, go into our downstairs brain, where the easiest way to think about it is there's a lot of fight, flight, freeze, maybe some fawn, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this happens in young children, and it happens as in adulthood. And I always want to just help people with just one little disclaimer. The idea is never to be regulated all the time. That's just not the human experience. But when we're working with schools and kids and families that are having, somebody's having the experience of being dysregulated often, and then is having the experience of feeling unsafe, and then maybe having unsafe behaviors for the community, then we want to help build systems and environments that really promote regulation with our young people and also skill building, right?
Yeah.
So, simplest way to think about it is when I'm dysregulated, it's really easy, even as a 50-year-old, 51-year-old woman, to go into some state of fight, flight, freeze. But it's really profound for little kids to try and start to do that. And so, working with schools now on how to support educators and administrators, and then certainly parents to really help these students that are experiencing this succeed.
Hmm.
So in 2019, on the team that I'm a part of for the organization I work for, we were just understanding because we're down on the ground in the field with so many educators that there were just more and more kids showing up in the building with this chronic dysregulation and these big behaviors.
Hmm.
And so, lots of kids flipping desks and running out of classrooms and crawling under stuff, and you couldn't get them to come out, and you know, kicking and biting and punching. And so we were looking, we're like, it's not enough to just analyze the situation. People want tools.
Hmm.
And through a dear friendship with Sissy White, she connected me to a guy named James Encinas, and we had an hour-long phone call, and he said, hey, I'm actually pulling some people from across the country together, and I want you to come to this training by this organization called the Family Peace Initiative. And they work on violence and, you know, ending violence and promoting peace. And they work with batterers. They've been in the domestic violence field for years. And he's like, and it's in Topeka, Kansas. And I was like, well, that's like 2 hours from my house, And so that felt, pretty like that was right what I was supposed to be doing. And so we went to Topeka and met Steve and Dorothy Halley, that run that organization. And we're pretty blown away by the work that they are doing and the data that they're getting on really transforming lives of people that are using violence to live their lives. And in that, Carl, the first 15 minutes of this 2-day training, they asked us, are you mad, sad, glad, or afraid? And when's the last time you used cruelty in a relationship? That was the check-in question.
Mm.
And I just remember thinking, what is going on here, right?
It's going to be serious.
It's going to be serious. And then over the next 2 days, I was in a domestically violent marriage for 13 years and had a lot of old ideas about that. Had done a lot of work, a lot of meditation, a lot of spiritual work, and kind of healed through that. But what I was really looking for is if they can help these men, then surely we can take some of these approaches and help kids, right? And it's a trauma focused approach. But I can tell you, Carl, by the end of the 2 days, they kept asking me, are you mad, sad, glad, or afraid? And like, I didn't know what I was.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like really frustrated that they kept asking me,
Right.
like every time I'd say something, they'd be like, well, is that mad, sad, glad, or afraid? And I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't know, I don't even know. And,
Yeah.
I left that training just really in a lot of cognitive dissonance about feelings.
Mm.
And, as I've gone deeper into the work, I understand now that when there's been a lot of trauma, especially when we're young, our thinking brain, our feeling brain, and our body brain all kind of compartmentalize.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that we do that is self-protection, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, the truth of the matter is, and then the other thing that you have going on is kind of this emotional blindness in our society. And when I mean emotional blindness, most of us, whether we grew up in loving, consistent, safe, structured homes, or if we grew up in a lot of chaos, we were all kind of taught the American way, which is feelings aren't really welcome here.
Right.
We need you to be glad all the time. And somehow mad seems to be acceptable these days. But the whole sad and afraid thing was like I didn't even know we were supposed to try and find those feelings. I just
Mm.
thought we were supposed to not try and feel those feelings,
Right,
right? So
right.
this exploration
Yeah,
of,
especially mad or loud, right? So if you fawn, if the trauma response is to fawn, sometimes that's okay.
yeah,
Or all right with you being quiet and staying out of the way. But this is not regulation, right? I mean, it is kind of surface level, but it's something deeper than just regulating our triggers so we can get our brain back online. It's deeper than that, right?
yeah, especially if you're going to talk about fawn, Carl, for just a minute, fawn is really that reaction of I'm going to submit so that I can get my needs met.
Mm,
And, that isn't going to create a vibrant experience for a person
hmm
if they're using that as an ongoing practice. And a lot of times, that's developed when there's a lack of safety
hmm
or a lack of attachment, right? And so,
Right,
however that looks for somebody, and we all kind of have these little approaches that we find when we're young that we carry into adulthood, right?
right.
And so this idea of being sad and afraid, you know, um, gosh, what I think about is when I lost my dad, who was this tremendous enlightened witness in my life, and he was real sick for a couple years, and when you're a caregiver to that, you just kind of get worn out and tired. But he was my person, man, and when I lost him, I just, I went to work the next day, Carl.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a speaking engagement to go to, and I went to work, and someone asked me, they said, "Why are you here?"
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Because this is where I need to be." And what looking back, it's because I wanted to keep moving so I didn't have to feel sad or afraid.
Yeah, right.
Right. So I'm just going to throw myself into work because, and that's when you get into the river of cruelty model, which is Stephen Dorothy's model, you understand that when there's these huge emotional loads, we start trying to find defense systems to not feel our feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then at night when I would lay down and it felt like, this tidal wave of emotion would try and wash over me around my dad. And I just remember, in my mind, just like throwing up walls and holding that back.
Mm-hmm.
And then during the day, I would listen to gangster rap turned up all the way in my car because I just had all these feelings and I didn't know what to do. And then, a year and a half later, I end up in this training in Topeka, Kansas, where they're like, hey, if you're not, if you don't know how to safely access, identify, and experience your sad and afraid, that's just weird.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we are created to have those emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just was like, I knew something important happened in Topeka, Kansas, but I was also deeply confused, and it began this internal wrestle inside of me. And one of the things that was really brilliant and I have found to be true is that anger is a secondary emotion. And I think most adults kind of know that, but we don't necessarily consider what that means. Well, secondary to what? Well, secondary to fear
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes sad,
Right,
right?
right.
So
That's right.
if we have a whole population of people that can't access their sad and afraid, I always tell people, I'm like, fear happens inside of me. Mad is when I give my fear away,
Mm,
right? And
yeah.
we call that passing the football, right? And you think the easiest way to think about it is a kid when they flip a desk at school and kind of blow up, right? Well, what was happening right before that desk got flipped?
Mm-hmm.
Handing out a math worksheet to a kid who has a deep fear of feeling stupid
Mm-hmm.
can cause that kid to have an emotional reaction of anger. And that kid flips a desk and we call it passing the football. Now who's afraid, right? The
Right.
kid's not afraid anymore. Everybody else is. We've
That's
just
yeah,
handed that off, right?
exactly. Yeah.
And so this journey since 2020, because we went back to Stephen Dorothy and said, you guys have something here. We would love to figure out how to take this to families who are not actively involved in domestic violence,
Mm-hmm.
um, and also schools. And so we went and did intensive training Like we were scheduled to go to our first in-person training as a team, and then COVID happened,
Mm.
which you talk about a whole lot of fear and a whole lot of
Yeah.
mad, and a whole lot of
Yeah.
sad, and just, it was crazy. So we spent the next year becoming deeply trained virtually with Steve and Dorothy, and built a beautiful friendship with them and their work. And so now, just this idea that there is this really powerful tool, which is also a important gift to give to people, to start inviting them to consider they're sad and they're afraid, right? To just name feelings
Yeah.
and
So
talk about what's that mostly about.
we talked about when I went through this with you, um, that I had been affected by some Benedictine sisters in your in your area or down towards your way or whatever, um, who did a similar thing. And I think Peter Levine talks about somatic experiencing or something like that. And several people do similar things. But they talk about, and what I heard you say in there is kind of something happened, right? So it's not just like my dog when the post lady comes. When the post lady comes, he he loses his self and he's barking and snarling and not like he is right now on the floor. Um, After she's gone, I say, "Come on, shake it off," and he literally shakes it off. And but it's way more complex in humans, right?
Mhm.
The stuff that goes on. But when we can be with the part of us that's mad, sad, glad,
Mhm.
afraid, I always forget the fourth one, then something shifts,
Mhm.
right? And that's what I heard you describing is that so I'm not just regulating, I'm now shifted something that maybe next time it's going to be more responsive instead of reactive to
Mhm.
triggers. I'm still going to be triggered, right?
Mhm.
And I see you shaking your head. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, um, and very, if I just a testament, it was called something like Peaceful Families in Schools. And I'm like you, I'm like, oh, wait, we're about to do something like focusing. And I knew you had done this with me over lunch. Um, and both times found it really effective. Just a shift in something inside of me. And that doesn't ever happen if we don't connect mind and body, right?
Mhm.
It's just not going to happen. Our defenses are going to keep coming up. We're going to be in survival mode. And the longer we're there, the more we stay there, right?
Yeah, Carl. And
Sorry, I said a lot of things. And
no, that's good. And I was just thinking about, at lunch, you were telling me something when we were in Atlanta. You were just giving me a sacred gift, a piece of your story. And there's several directions that humans go with that. Sometimes it's, hey, thanks so much for telling me. Sometimes it's like, oh, wow, I identify with that because sometimes folks ask more questions about, what you're sharing.
Mhm,
But through this work, I just gave you my gift back to you, which was, hey, Carl, is that mad, sad, glad, or afraid?
mhm,
And then what I did was I just handed it back to you to go deeper, to go internal,
mhm,
and to figure out, what is going on inside of me. And when we're scared and mad, it's very natural for a person to become externally focused, right? Which means I'm looking outside of me.
right.
I'm assigning blame, or I'm trying to analyze, or
Mhm.
I, sometimes,
Planning an escape. Yeah.
yeah, sometimes I'm just mad and I'm on Facebook saying a whole bunch of stuff, right? Like
Mhm,
I'm externally focused. It's they, them, those, right?
mhm,
Because I wasn't ever taught, like, how do I just go internal and sit for a minute and be like, why am I so dysregulated right now over this? Like, what is this really about? Where's my sad and my afraid? And, you know, uh, to go a little deeper, I mean, you get into Jungian theory, right? Carl Jung, and I never say that right, but you guys are going to forgive me.
yeah,
But
in the same way with that name. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's this idea of kind of these origin stories in our youth,
Mm,
and most everything that trips me out today is connected to something from a long time ago,
mm,
right? And so there's some deeper exploration there, but just, sometimes just offering someone the dignity of, hey, is that mad, sad, glad, or afraid? What's that mostly about? Is a really powerful way to help people feel really seen and really heard and
yeah.
deeper, more
They
connected.
do it alone or with other people, or does it matter? How does it matter?
I think when we're really jammed up and we get into the not die part of our brain, the
Hmm.
survival part of our
Hmm.
brain, sometimes I can't do that by myself. I need a witness to help me kind of start to sort through the big jumbled mess that's going on inside of my head, right?
They're not really given any advice or very little, right? Just a little direction, a little come along with me kind of, right? So it's not that they're going to have a magic answer for you, or a book to buy or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just being there, right? And
Yeah, it is, Carl. And, if you have the ability, if you kind of understand the process, you can start to help people figure out when they're operating in their shadow self or their false self, right?
hmm
And kind of challenge that with folks, help them challenge that, right? Because when I'm in an ego part of my brain or the downstairs part of my brain, right? It's all about self-protection.
hmm
But then there's also typically this I'm not enough kind of space down there. I'm not enough. I'm bad. I'm worthless. I'm not safe. I'm trash. I'm whatever. And we all have that stuff, right?
right.
But that becomes the lie that becomes the truth that I start operating out of,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And so which is some of the peaceful schools and family deeper work that we were doing together a couple weeks ago, Carl, is
Yeah.
okay, what if that's not true? What if some of those funky belief systems I have about myself actually were, a result of cruelty that happened to me before I could do anything about it?
Yeah.
And could I at least consider that that might not be truth, right?
Yeah. You mentioned shadow. How do you define shadow?
Yeah, your shadow self, your false self, your ego. I mean, it's called different things, right? And we all have this shadow self and this authentic self, or this true self, or this enlightened self. I mean, I've heard it called lots of different things, right?
Golden shadow is one.
Golden shadow,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Shadow and golden shadow. And, part of the journey is just this increased pursuit of self-awareness.
Mm.
And I don't mean self-awareness to the point where I'm analyzing myself all the time, but at least to
That's in your
understand,
head. Yeah.
right, that I've got this shadow self and this golden shadow self, and they're both a part of me. And the journey as we get older is to really try and integrate the two,
Mm.
and not run from one or deny the other, right?
Right.
It's I have both of these, and under stress, my shadow self's going to come out because that's the self that really helped me survive a lot of hard things.
Yeah.
And Carl, the hardest part about this particular part of the journey is when I really start to go internal and I really start to dig around down there. I
Hmm.
really begin to experience this reality that says, wow, I've been the one who's received a lot of pain, and
Hmm.
I've also been the cause of other people's
Yeah.
pain.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so there's this feeling of deeper connectedness to self and others when I realize, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Right.
It's when you realize that you go from that, I've identified mad, sad, glad, afraid, what I'm feeling. If you stay with that a little bit, then you go to that deeper place, right? And that I've recently been calling it murky
Yeah.
because it's not like, okay, this is exactly what's wrong with me. It's a place probably that I've never, consciously been to, right? So um be aware, that my son's on a podcast with me now, And one of his things, I'm so proud of him that he says this, but he's 32 or 33 years old, but he says takes work. All of it takes work, and we're such gymnastically inclined about avoiding that necessary and hard work that we just keep avoiding it till it comes out sideways and we cause other problems. But it's murky, right? So when you finally get there, it's murky, and it's important to stay there and see what comes up, right?
You know, and Brene Brown talks about going into the swamp. And the idea is not to go into the swamp or the murky and camp out and live there. You know, you're not supposed
Right.
to build your
Yeah,
house.
exactly.
But
Yeah.
the idea is, you know, where shame lives there, guilt lives there. And the idea is hopefully to have someone else go in the swamp with you
Mhm.
and shine your flashlight
Mhm.
and realize that while it doesn't need to be your home,
Mhm.
there's value in being able to go there with someone else so that some of the terror of what's hiding in the swamp becomes deeply diminished when you're like, oh yeah,
Mhm.
I walked in here, someone else is my witness, they didn't run away from me, and I came back out. And somehow I learned something while I was in there, and somehow I healed and increased something about myself that I need, and I decreased things about myself that I can start to begin to let go of.
And I can't really explain that, maybe. I might not be able to explain exactly what happened because I'd been in my head again, right? But but there's a realization that something changed, and maybe I don't even need to understand it totally, but it's different, right?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
that program that I experienced was called Peaceful Families, Peaceful
Peaceful,
Schools.
peaceful schools and families.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is that the only title it's under, or is
Well, we built that with permission after we were trained and certified through the Family Peace Initiative, which is working with batterers, right?
Mhm.
And the world of domestic violence, and then justice impacted youth, so kids that are incarcerated. Um, Stephen Dorothy's organization goes into prisons. I mean, it really is violence work. And how do we show up and truly help people move past using violence to try and be successful in the world, which I know sounds intense, but what I always tell schools and organizations that I'm working with, your most violent people among you are your most afraid,
Mhm.
right?
For sure. Yeah.
And that's not how we look at that, you know, because it dings our own protection mechanisms, right? And we
Mhm.
just start kind of, and then I get externally focused. I'm like, what's wrong with that guy? And he shouldn't do that. And da 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 da. Instead of being able to, you know, stay regulated myself and understand something's going on with that kid, something's going on with that teacher, something's going on with that mom, something's going on with that politician.
Yeah. And something's going on with me by the way, for the way
Right.
I'm reacting to it. Um, so Rebecca's organization is called ESSDACK, ESSDACK. We also mentioned the Family Peace Initiative, James Encinas.
James and Cenas. Yeah, that's my
Yeah,
friend. He's out in Colorado.
yeah.
Yeah.
Peaceful Schools and Families. Uh, but I want to give you a chance to close this topic out so we can go on to something else, even though we could talk about this all day. Um, I first of all, I just want to say I benefited greatly from it. And I come from an environment where I asked a 86-year-old woman who had been teaching Sunday school in a Baptist church for probably 40 or 50 years. And she taught men, which that's a big feat in a Baptist church. But she had taught consistently year after year after year. And we did the Experiencing God study, which is sometimes labeled mystical, And I asked her, um, you know, in your situation, how do you feel, or something like that, or talk to her about an experience from your life. And she just clammed up. This was the matriarch of the church. Her husband built the church with his hands. She knew all the doctrine and everything, but she hadn't experienced that before. that had never been part of the healing plan or the plan of the church. So um, it's, my lineage is against that feeling and talking and all that. But I'm so glad I've been able to uncover that and start working through it um, at 60 years old. So, what do you want to say in closing out this topic?
Well, I think, Carl, that's a really big testament to something I said in the beginning, which is this emotional blindness that we just perpetuate in our society with our young people and within faith communities and non-faith communities. I mean, like feelings seem like an inconvenience, and we're so hedonistic. We are just all in our head.
Hmm.
But I'll close with this story. This little girl, I went to a calm room in a school system, and there's this little girl that came in, and she walked in the room. She's probably 5 or 6. She was tiny. She had these big eyes and cute little girl, and she was mad. And her teacher, brings her in there, marches her in there, and it starts threatening her about, you're not gonna go to the field trip if you keep this up. And the little girl's got her arms crossed and she's growling. And I know, as someone who does a lot of this work, that when kids are growling, it's because they're in their brainstem, right? And the teacher's asking her questions, the kid can't answer them. And
Right.
from Stacy Nation, I learned how to use oximeters on kids to check heart rate. And so all the kids that are coming in and out of this calm room, they're super interested in the oximeter, right? But this little girl, I showed her, I said, "Can I check your heart rate?" And she just growls at me, and she goes over and sits down, and she's just scowling. And
Mhm.
another kid comes in and wants, I ask, check their heart rate. They're like, yeah. And I check their heart rate, write it down, and they go over and start doing some regulation strategies, right? Well, pretty soon this little girl sticks her finger out to me.
Mhm.
And I said, "You want me to check your heart rate?" And she said, "Mm-hmm." And I go over and I put the oximeter on her. Now, mind you, she'd already been in the room for probably 3 or 4 minutes, and her heart rate was still 138, 140. I don't remember, right? So she's
Yeah.
super escalated.
Hmm.
And I said, "Hey," I said, "I want you to try something with me. Keep that oximeter on. I want you to breathe." Kids don't typically like breathing activities. It feels weird to them. But I found with that oximeter on, kids can breathe like that. And then
Right.
they get real interested because they're like, "Oh my gosh, something's happening to the numbers and I'm starting to feel different," right? So I get her down a little bit and I have her do some crossing the midline body taps with me and rhythmic and all that stuff. But I get her kind of more regulated. And then I ask her, I said, "Hey, what happened?" And she said, "It's math. It's math." And I said, "Thanks. Is that mad, sad, glad, or afraid?" And she said, "I'm so mad." And then we start, and she said, and I said, "Thanks." And I don't remember all the things, but basically she told me because of that mad, she punched her friend that's next to her. And I said, "Well, what is that? Is that sad or afraid?" And then she gets to the bottom of that kind of mad, sad, glad, or afraid funnel.
Mhm.
She said, "I'm so stupid."
Mhm.
That was what was driving, like the teacher hands out the math paper. Somehow that triggered this feeling of being stupid in this little
Yeah.
girl.
Being exposed. Yeah.
And I said, "Thanks."
Mm.
And I said, "What if you're so stupid isn't true? What would be more true?" And this little 5 or 6 year old girl with these big eyes raises her head up and she goes, "That I'm just a late bloomer."
That's so
And
cool.
I said,
Yeah.
"Thanks." And I said, "Who
Mhm.
in this school helps you know that you're not stupid, that you're just a late bloomer?" And she points to the lady, the vice principal, and she says, "Her."
Yeah.
But thanks. And if you just knew that she was right, the vice principal, and that you're not stupid, that you're just a late bloomer, what do you need to do? And she said, "I need to go say sorry to my friend." And I said, "Thanks." Right?
Mm-hmm.
Mad, sad, glad, or afraid. It took me literally, Carl, 4 minutes, 5 minutes to walk this little girl through a process where she had a realization that there was a story that she was telling herself
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't giving her the outcome she wanted. And
Right.
maybe that story's not even true. You know,
Right.
and it wasn't, we weren't in a therapeutic setting, and I'm certainly not a therapist, right? But just the simple gift of, "Hey, are you mad, sad, glad, or afraid?" And normalizing that. "Hey, what's that mostly about?" "Thanks. What's that mostly about?" Very quickly, we got to the "I'm so stupid," and we challenged that. And then we came out with the truth, right? And so,
Challenging it after you acknowledged it.
Yeah.
You got to acknowledge it first, say, so you feel that.
Yeah.
Then we can gently say, because my wife had an experience with a kid that said, I'm stupid. And she said, no, you're not. And
That I didn't do, right? I asked a question of
exactly.
what if that's not true?
Right.
Right? What would be more true?
Yeah.
And, I didn't say because if we could just go around and tell kids, tell people, you're not stupid, you're not trash, you're not worthless, and have them believe it, Carl, like the
Yeah.
world would be, I mean, we wouldn't need antidepressants anymore. We wouldn't need but
Yeah.
that's just not how it works, right?
Right.
Um, Folks have to go internal and they have to find some of the faulty belief systems that are hijacking their lives.
Yeah.
And that's whether you're 5 or 55, man, that work is always on the table to be done.
Yeah. Man, that went fast. A
Thank-
lot of stuff packed into a little bit of time there. I appreciate you coming on again. And we're going to talk about some more stuff, but please check out Rebecca's stuff online. The company again is called ESSDACK, ESSDACK, and it's real easy to find. So I'll leave you to that. And the other recommendations, you can push backspace and look at what else she recommended. But thank you so much for coming on, and for the listeners out there, as always, be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary podcast.
Remember, all who wander in the desert are not lost.
We believe all of our stories are sacred.
We are always here if you need someone to hear your story.
Check out our blog on Pathos and also our YouTube channel.
And stay tuned for our Leaning Forward conference.
Remember, we love you.
And be at peace.